about feminism, women empowerment, and women's rights, it has become imperative that we have to speak about the position of women within the LGBTQI community. My name is Mtetwa, and this is The Girls Table. So joining me for this week's episode of The Girls Table are two ladies from a feminist collective, VOVO, and they are going to tell us more about the work that they do. Carol, Miles, welcome to The Girls Table.
Thank you.
All right, please take this opportunity to introduce yourselves.
My name is Miles Moyo. I work for Voice of The Voiceless as a programs officer. So VOVO is a feminist LGBTQ collective, so that's lesbian and bisexual women and transgender persons and queer persons. Our work is mostly focusing on increasing visibility of LGBTQ groups, and as well as making sure that the women's and feminist movements are inclusive of LGBTQ persons. And I also identify as non-binary, so most people just refer to me as Miles or person.
Miles or person?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll come back to the non-binary part, because I'm sure a lot of us would want to understand what that's about. Carol?
My name is Caroline Mtetwa. I'm also a programs officer at Voice of The Voiceless. And basically, I think Miles has said most of what we do, but we also, something that's very key to our work is providing safe spaces for LGBTQ persons, as lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer persons. And we also just provide these spaces so that people can strategize and get to understand themselves and each other. Because for most queer people, I'll put it as that, or queer women and trans persons, it's very difficult to find like-minded people where you just get to talk and share how you feel, what you go through on a daily basis. In a very honest way. It's very difficult to find that. People always refer to their girlfriends as boyfriends in certain spaces. So we just provide that space where people get to openly say, you know what, my girlfriend. And, it's so liberating to be able to do that sometimes.
All right, before we get into the work that Voice of The Voiceless does, we'd like you to help us understand or break down the term LGBTQI for us, because a lot of the people get a little confused. They don't understand what exactly it is and how to differentiate between, the words that are used. And of course, to highlight, because I noticed you concentrate specifically on LGBTQ. Exactly. So can you break that down for us a little bit?
So L is lesbian. So that's a woman who's attracted spiritually, emotionally, physically to other women. So that's pretty simple.
Yeah, straightforward.
Lesbian. And then gay is a man who's like a lesbian, attracted to the same sex. So also attracted to men like them. So again, very simple to understand. Also, which some might beg to differ. And also bisexual is someone who is attracted to more than one gender and more than one sex, depending. But not necessarily at the same time. And why I say more than one gender is because gender and sex are relatively different. And there are also transgender persons. So who might be one sex but identify as another gender. So gender being a social construct, where it's a sign that men behave a certain way and women behave a certain way. So when someone is bisexual, they're attracted to both or more than one. So they can be attracted to maybe men, women, and trans persons, or non-binary men and women. There's so many different types of bisexual. Not all bisexuals are the same. Some are monoromantic, some are polyromantic, which is stuff that will go.
We won't get
some date more than one person at the same time.
Yeah.
Some date one person at a time. Some people never get to experience a relationship with another gender or another sex, but they still acknowledge that attraction that they have for that sex or gender. But yeah, generally that's what a bisexual person is. And then a trans person, so you have trans women and trans men. Trans women are people who were born biologically male, and definitely the way they were born does not reflect who they are as a person, how they identify as a person, how they feel, where they feel they belong as a person. So when someone is a trans woman, they're born male physically and everything, and they're assigned male on their birth certificates and IDs and everything. But deep down inside, they are a woman, and they identify as a woman. So they begin to affirm that identity by taking up that gender, because gender is a social construct, like I said. So they begin to familiarize themselves more with roles and duties assigned to women as a way of emphasizing that this is who I am, as a way of really getting people to understand that I was born in the wrong body, so to speak. So most people think that lesbian and gay persons and bisexual persons sometimes are trans persons. Like there's but then it's totally different, because one is a sexual orientation and the other is a gender identity. So trans men are people who were born as women but now identify as men. Yeah. So again, I know it's hard to understand. I can tell from your face.
I'm actually like mind blown. But
Yeah,
I think
but
it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really. I think sometimes it takes people just taking time out and trying to understand that people begin to, those are the little steps that will help a person really come to terms with the fact that this person might not be like me, but they face the same problems that I face. They face the same trouble that I face. Queer persons are people who are within the LGBTI community mostly, but some queer persons are straight, well, or at least have sex with opposite sex. But queer basically means people that don't conform to the norm. So most feminists would identify as queer because their feminist identity is against the norm.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, sometimes people within the LGBTI community also take queer to be an identity of, like, we call each other queer all the time. Like, hey, I'm queer, you're queer, we're queer, you know. Because as a way of reclaiming, because there was a time back in the day where queer was used as a derogatory term to say, like how people would say istaban here, and as a way of ukuchotoza or something. But so when we say it to each other, it's a way of reclaiming, like nigger, how people say nigger, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how it's okay for us to call each other that, but not someone else. You know? Yeah. So so yeah, that's what queer is. It's just a very free floating sort of identity where you don't really fit in or fall under any specific identity, but you just express yourself in a way that does not conform to the norms. Yeah.
All right. Have you spoken about the I?
Okay, intersex. I think intersex, the best way I would, there's an article that came out recently, well, some months back, which was Restoration to Normalcy, Operation Restoration to Normalcy, where basically a certain hospital was calling people to come and have people that were born intersex to come and have corrective surgery to restore them to normalcy. If you're a human rights defender, such language, you just begin to wonder.
It's problematic.
Yeah. But basically, someone who's intersex is someone who was born with ambiguous genitalia. So someone who sometimes doesn't show on the outside, like it could be within the reproductive system, it could be within the hormones. There's so many different levels to it.
Yeah.
Some could be born with not two organs per se, but one, not very clear whether it's male or female. It could be an enlarged clitoris that looks like a penis, or things like that. So when someone is born intersex, they are by right they are neither male nor female. They are a third sex. They are intersex, because inter is like it's like an integration of both sexes into this person who is not abnormal, by the way. It's just how they were born, intersex people exist, and I mean, by them calling for people to come and have corrective surgery, it shows that intersex people exist. And I think sometimes how they are handled as a constituent is somewhat ignorant. I think people need to take time to research and understand, because such language, when you're at home and you're intersex and you're reading restoration to normalcy, you automatically think there's something wrong with me, So things like that, yeah.
All right, thank you for in the little time that we gave you to try and enlighten a lot of us about, the differences. As Miles was introducing herself, she mentioned the word non-binary, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Please explain that to us a little bit.
Yeah, so under that whole acronym, the LGBTQI acronym, under the trans group, so now we use trans and gender diverse persons. So that's where you would find your gender non-conforming people or gender fluid people or non-binary people. So basically, I don't really conform or subscribe to the binaries of men or woman. So I just identify as a person. So even when people refer to me, I'd rather they just say, Miles was, or Miles they.
So me saying her and saying lady.
Exactly. So
it's problematic.
Yeah. So a big part of identities that fall under transgender and gender diverse is the issue of pronouns. How trans women, when affirming their identities, would really then start to remind people use the pronoun she, or trans men would then prefer the pronoun he, and then you have non-binary people and gender non-conforming people using pronouns they or them or just their names. Yeah, it's a really broad spectrum. It's really broad. It also includes looking at the aspect of queer. Carol mentioned that it's people that are outside the norms, which is true, and in our instance, mostly it's people that fall outside the sexuality and gender norms. So then we are not what is expected. Well, we may be men and women, but in terms also of, and sometimes we're not men or women, and then also in terms of then who we are attracted to, who we have sex with, who we are in relationships with, is then queer. So also the word started, as Carol said, as something to say these people are queer, they are odd, they are weird. But now it's something really that we've claimed to say, okay, yeah, we are queer. And, yeah.
All right. Before we get into the work of VOVO, what is the place of the LGBT community within the context of Ubulawayo, Matabeleland, and Christian context, so to speak? How do you fit in within this context and locality that we're in?
Generally, I think Bulawayo is conservative, but at the same time, this is my personal opinion, I think it's a little bit more tolerant than other cities that I've been to. But in terms of where is our place, I really don't think we have one yet. I mean, because if you have an identity that people either choose to ignore or do not bother to really try and understand or try and accommodate within the social structures that exist. So this is within your families, the churches, the workplace, recreational like centers like your bars and your clubs. So all these spaces that we as people really use on a day-to-day, and you have your identity being something that will either make people look at you like, what is this? And sometimes you actually have people say, Usan, you know. So living in that kind of environment and growing up in that kind of environment can be really stifling. even in terms of how you develop as a person, whether it's your personality or career or at school, it really also has a bearing on that, because it's then hard to say, okay, I'm very proudly Bulawayo, but this city will not accept me as I am. So sometimes you then have to conform and bend just to fit in, bend just to make things a little bit easier, also depending on your background, where you're coming from. So religious institutions are not exactly open. Yeah. So you have some that actually preach against homosexuality, and then you have some that are silent. But in terms of such things as dress code, I mean, a lot of people take dress code for granted, but you have some people that cannot, where some women, people that are perceived as women, that cannot wear skirts and dresses. And not because they don't want to or they're being rebellious, but it's not something, it's like clothing is a personal choice for everyone. So for some of us, it's difficult to then fit into, as a person that looks like a woman, then you have to dress like this, and when you go to church, this is how you dress and this is how you behave. So for some people, even most of us have grown up in very religious families, we grew up going to church, but as you grow up, it becomes more difficult now to be in that space, because the way you look, really, church, or you have mama church coming to saying, but you can't dress like this, or even when you go into weddings, maybe me look happy, and I can't kappa wearing like chinos and a blazer, because it's not the norm, in families and our society. It's just so cultural and traditional and stuck in doing things a certain way. You have funerals where you have to go there, go sketi or insaro and so it's always a daily struggle to find that balance, to say, okay, how do I navigate this space? Do I avoid it altogether, or do I then bend, or do I just be stubborn and go as I am? And then sometimes there's backlash, because you don't want to be that person in your family or your community, or because sometimes it's not that you've done anything, but the fact that you look different,
just by being yourself,
it is a problem. So it makes it a daily struggle going for job interviews. If I want to work, for example, at a formal institution here in Bulawayo, a government institution, I can't go to an interview wearing chinos and a shirt and a blazer. It won't be acceptable, because they're going to look at my papers, then look at me like, okay, your ID says you're a woman, but then you are dressed in this way. Already, before we even start talking about my skills and my experience, my capacity to do that job, there's already a question of, why do you look this way? So a lot of spaces then are hard to navigate because of that.
I guess we'll come back to dig even deeper to the issues of exclusion, discrimination, and so forth. But maybe let's go back. VOVO, Voice of the Voiceless. When did it start? What was the intention behind the organization, and what exactly does it do?
Right. So, VOVO, or Voice of the Voiceless, was established in 2013. In September. Yeah, our anniversary is coming up. But only later formalized. But yeah, the establishment was in 2013. And it was basically a group of feminist LGBTQ persons coming together and saying, you know what, in as much as there are organizations that exist, those organizations don't speak to our struggles quite eloquently, or they don't speak to them as they should. So we need to have our own space where we challenge patriarchy, even within the LGBTQI community. Because you find, I mean, it's as simple as having conversations where people will say, the gays have done this. And you're like, but it's not just gay people. It's not just the gay men, you know?
Yeah.
But then it's already been termed that way, because only homosexual men have been given that precedence to say, the gays, you know, they take up the whole. So that was one of our political issues, to say, you know what?
Maybe before you continue, you might want to distinguish that, for I'm sure some people missed that, because as I was reading, I also thought it was a typo. But the LGBTQ is separate from the LGBTQ.
No, it's part of it, but there come times where we need to differentiate. So there are also organizations that work with gay and bisexual men only, mainly particularly with health and things like that. And then there are also organizations that do not work with gay and bisexual men, but work with the rest of the acronym. And there are also people that work with trans persons only.
Okay.
And yeah, so we are all one community, we are all brothers and sisters, but sometimes there are certain issues when we really get to the crust of it, where we need to tailor-make interventions for specific groups. So this establishment of VOVO was part of that tailor-making of interventions to say.
So what specific issues is this organization tailor-made to tackle?
All right. So like I was saying, to challenge patriarchy within the LGBTI community. So making sure that feminism is introduced into the space of LGBTQI advocacy and movement building and organizing, basically, to say we need to look at things from a feminist lens if we are to truly acquire equality and have a non-discriminatory space or a movement that is non-discriminatory. We need to look at it from a feminist lens. Also to integrate, because there was also this misconception that LGBTQI persons don't really belong within the women's movement because lesbians want to be men.
So they can't be feminists because they're not fighting men.
Because they're not women. They want to be men. So, which is a big misconception, by the way. We don't want to be men. I'm not lesbian, but yeah, lesbians don't want to be men. I have proof of that. And also you find some spaces which will then say, no, lesbians are fine, but bisexual women, no, they like men also. We don't like men. We don't. So we had all these different layers that we had to sort of try and deal with, but also ensuring that we advocate for inclusion within the women's rights movement of LGBTQI persons. To say, as a women's rights movement in Zimbabwe, or a feminist movement, if we are aiming at that as the women of Zimbabwe, because we are also women in Zimbabwe, we need to be inclusive of certain groups.
Yeah.
And what then grew from that space was that we discovered that it wasn't just LGBTQI persons that were excluded or felt excluded from the women's rights movement. There were other groups that felt marginalized within the larger women's rights movement. So we then established something that we call the Women's Collective, which is a space where we meet as different groups of marginalized women, not just LGBTQI, but also women with disabilities, sex workers, young women, because also the women's rights movement can tend to be very ageist sometimes. So we wanted to tackle some of those issues. So within the Women's Collective, we are then movement building and organizing to formulate strategies to infiltrate the larger women's rights movement. And it's quite successful because we have become each other's allies as groups of marginalized women, where even if I'm not there, someone can speak to the issues of a bisexual woman. And even if Miles is not there, they can say, no, but they're also non-binary people. And, and we as well get to speak for these other groups of women that we work with, to say, no, sex workers face the same challenges that we face because they're also seen as social deviants. They are seen as swaying from the norm, So we are able to speak to each other's struggles quite eloquently, actually, because within the space, we cultivated a culture of cross-pollination across movements. So I know it's very seemingly complex, but it's basically us sitting in a round circle or on a round table and just, discussing our struggles and adopting a culture of your struggle is my struggle. So what are your issues? What are my issues? Let's take time to understand each other, as opposed to just pushing our issues and saying, no, we're gay and these are our troubles. Oh, please understand this. No. I think we've reached a point where we need to, as a society, I think in general, really, we need to take time out to hear each other out, because we have become each other's support systems. Mm-hmm. So I think gone are the days of us going to someone and saying, I've gone to counseling sessions, and some of the times I've ended up counseling the counselor. So, I understand that sometimes we shouldn't then take time to say, let's just shove our burdens onto someone. Let's also take time to understand them, because they also have issues that they're facing on a daily basis, and no one really takes time to hear them out. So, yeah. Also speaking to mental health, we, as the LGBTI community in general, we face a lot of challenges that can have an effect on our mental health. These can lead to, in adverse cases, can lead to suicidal ideations, because, if all your life you've been told you are this thing that is hated, or you're acting like a girl, or you're acting like a boy, and it's just hints, and then one day it dawns on you that I'm actually this thing that I've been taught to hate all my life. It can be quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people there have been people who have killed themselves, actually. Because and it's not like because they were weak, it was just too much to bear. I myself have reached that point many times, because you live in a community where people expect you to act a certain way. You're expected to do certain things by a certain age. I think it's also in terms of understanding the intersectionality of our work as VOVO, or the intersectional approach that we use, is understanding that with these other groups of women, there are challenges as well, because it's not just lesbian women who are expected to have a child at 25. Even young women face those challenges, where people say, look, you're becoming too educated, things like that. So it's understanding those issues, and really in those spaces we get to talk about these issues and really see. So in as much as our end goal is to get people to understand us, but we also want to understand people as well, and get them to have that space where they are free to talk about. Because I think what has worked for us is that we are the lesser being within the space, like everyone will be like, I'm a sex worker, I'm hated, but at least I'm not lesbian, because they are hated, so I think it has, and also we are humble people, so it really always toba, sometimes it helps. Mm-hmm. And within those spaces, really, people have really opened up, and the feedback is so overwhelming at times. To be able to say these things that are really,
All right, there you have it. Thank you once again to Miles and Carol for taking this opportunity to enlighten us. Very thought-provoking conversation. And like she said, just take time to inform yourself, because ignorance is not an excuse. And that is it for this week's episode of The Girls Table. It's all right.